And we've been working with each other since 8 years ago with John as well in the musical called Guadalupe, and then Soul Paul and many others. So I think without further ado, I'm just going to hand over the mic to Peter.
Okay, thank you, David, very much. Thank you. And thank you all of you for inviting me here. It's been really fun so far. Hope I don't spoil it for you all. I'll get this just out of the road in case I want to do a high kick or something. I want to commend David for taking the initiative to doing something like this in the parish and in Melbourne, because obviously people are coming from other quarters as well. It's a great thing to be able to share the gifts like this. It's a wonderful thing. And with the arts, of course, the arts, we tend to think those as being the natural talents, the natural gifts, but they become spiritualised. So they're spiritual gifts as well, aren't they? Yeah. Well, now, before I start my talk on cartooning, I must robe correctly for it. Excuse me.
That's a great photo to be taken.
Would you help me here, David? Hold it up for me. That's it. Great, thank you. Thanks, David. This is an artist's smock that is part of our artist association. The Art Association used to be called, way back in the early days, the Black and White Club of Sydney. And it was started way back in the days when Norman Lindsay and his brothers were artists, and it was just the Black and White Club of Sydney. And the whole idea was to just simply go to the pub and have a lot of drinks and, and share each other's drawings and that kind of stuff. Well, then gradually it grew and grew and grew, and it finally became the Black and White Club of Australia. And I didn't join until about 1981, I think it was, something like that. And it's now become, only in the last 3 or 4 years, they changed the name to the Australian Cartoonists Association. And the reason being is that black and white, which is the way everybody used to do their cartoons for newspapers, well, it's gone colour, hasn't it? And that's kind of ripped the truth out of our name, I still love the black and white title. I wish we were still a black and white club. Anyway, a lot of people do colour and everything now. And there's all sorts of things being added to the whole cartoon world. But what I wanted to tell you about was that when you think of a cartoon, you probably think of something you see in the newspaper and that it's got to be funny in some way. But in actual fact, a cartoon doesn't have to be funny, because a cartoon is simply a line drawing. It's a line drawing. The fact that it's great for making funny remarks, or political remarks, or caricaturing politicians, film stars, footy players, whatever you like, it can do anything, a line drawing. Ask the master here. He is also a great line artist in his paintings. And I wanted to tell you a story about the idea of what people think about the cartoon. There was an Aussie going to London, and all his friends said to him, when you get into London, you must go to the National Gallery and go and see the Leonardo cartoon. And he said, oh, right, okay, I'll go and see the Leonardo cartoon. So he got to London, and he got into the National Gallery, and he asked, where is the Leonardo cartoon? And they said, it's down there, sir, turn around to the right corner there, and there's a little room there where the cartoon is. Now, the Leonardo cartoon is actually, I've forgotten how big it is. I saw it myself and I can't remember now, but it's a drawing which is a preparation for a painting. Right. And it's done in either pencil or what do you call it?
Charcoal.
Thank you. Charcoal. Yes. And it's a line drawing. And the subject is the Virgin Mary and her mother, Saint Anne. And there are two little children boys, John the Baptist and Jesus, you see. And you can see it's an exploratory drawing, because at one stage there, the foot's drawing in several positions. And he couldn't quite decide where he'd have the foot, this way or that way. And anyway, the Aussie goes into this room, and it's a small room, and the cartoon is the only piece of artwork in the room. And it's very dim lighting, except for the focus on the cartoon. And people standing in that room looking at the cartoon whisper to each other in subdued tones, because they're in a reverent, oh wow, they're in front of the Leonardo cartoon. It's beautiful. And they talk in quiet tones like this, you see. And the Aussie goes in and he looks at the cartoon. He looks at the people around him and he says, I don't get it. Because he was obviously looking for a joke and it wasn't there. Well, the way it goes. And talking about humour, which we naturally associate with cartoons. Have you ever heard people say, I think God's got a sense of humour?
Yes.
Yes. A lot of people do say that, don't they? Well, I disagree. Because I say that it's only we who have a sense of humour, because he gave it to us. He invented humour, and he doesn't only have a sense of it, he knows it all. One thing you could say is he's the funniest God ever, because he gave us that gift of humour, and it's something we can revere him for and love him for. And to laugh in church is okay, because it's appreciating the gift, isn't it? Yeah. That's right. And all our gifts are something that he's given us, not just humour, but all sorts of beautiful gifts that you all have. And this is the kind of night where we can really trot them out and have a look at things. Yeah. And when I was in London, I was only there for 20 months. And I used to go into the city to visit their association, and I became a member of their association, and at that time it was called the Society of Strip Illustrators. So it wasn't all cartoons included in that club, it was just those who did comic strips and adventure strips for the local, the English industry. They used to have comic books coming out every week for both girls and boys, little tiny kids and teenagers, accordingly to what the subject would be right for what age. And actually hundreds of these comics came out every week. And when I first went to England, I thought, I'd love to do some comics and comic book art and that. And I got nowhere in Australia, because there's no industry here. And as soon as I walked into the editors there, they had a look at my stuff, said, yeah, we'll give you some work. And I got work straight away. And I thought, oh, wow, that was fast. And I even went up to Scotland, where another publisher was, up to Dundee, and walked in there, and they took me around and showed me the whole caboodle. They had magazines and newspapers and comics by the dozens, and there were about 12 comic editors there, each in charge of their own comic, And they all looked at my work, and they said, yes, too right. And they gave me 2 scripts to take home to get started. One was for a serial story of a detective. And boy, did I walk on air back to the railway station to go back home. And they even gave me £10 to buy me dinner and I had to sign for it. And I just got started into the comic industry that way, and it was really great. Well, one night I was in London, and with all the other cartoonists, and we were at a pub called the Edgar Wallace pub, just off Fleet Street. And it was called the Edgar Wallace pub because that's where Edgar Wallace, the great novelist of mysteries and crime stories, used to associate with his friends, and all of his novels, the front cover of his novels were all around the wall. So it was a good place for us to meet. And one guy told a story about how he had a first date with this girl. And I'm really here wanting to introduce a story about general ignorance about art and about cartoons and about any kind of art and all sorts of things. Because he tells this story of he took this girl out and they were having a lovely dinner, and she said to him, "What do you do?" And he said, "Oh, I draw Roy of the Rovers," which is a soccer story. It's a comic, and the book is the actual comic book of the weekly serial is called Roy of the Rovers, and the front story is called Roy of the Rovers, and the front page and the back page are in colour, and that's the Roy of the Rovers coming out every week. So. And she said, "What? You draw it?" And he said, "Yeah, I draw a Roy." And she said, "I always thought they printed it." Yes, darling, but somebody's got to draw it before they can print it. So people just don't think about it. It's all lads, that's all it is. They just don't think about it. So now you know a few things that maybe you didn't know before, but I don't know what you did or didn't know. Anyway, let me have a look at my notes so I know what I'm going to say. Yeah. I didn't become professional until I was 50 because of that, So I was obviously drawing comics for years before that. And I finally got a job as an art teacher. I went through the technical schools there and finally got a job then with De La Salle College teaching art. But the whole time I was teaching art in the tech schools, I was also drawing my own comics and gradually getting better and better and better. But it's amazing just how you make only slow progress when you're by yourself, Then as soon as you get thrust into industry, suddenly you've got to do things faster and better. And boy, do you start coming good after that. It kind of forces you to rise to the surface. Yeah.
So how did you start doing comics? Why did you start comics?
I drew mainly stuff that was influencing me when I was a little boy, reading comics. Detective stories. When I'm a teenager, I'm drawing detective stories, cowboy stories, naval stories, battles, and all of that kind of stuff, and Spitfires, and all of that kind of stuff that you see around. And the American comics of the 30s were really brilliant stuff. The art was really beautiful. Those were the golden years of the comics, really, when the newspapers in America were in constant competition with each other for circulation. And the best way to get a circulation was to have the best cartoonists doing the best comics. There was no television. So comics were big with everybody, adults as well as the kids. And they were funnies and they were also adventure stories. And that kind of stuff, some of it leaked out to Australia, and I kind of learned how to draw by reading, I went to Tech to do an art course too, did life and whatever other drawing lessons and design we did, but I learned to draw by reading the comics. Yeah.
So I said, our dad wouldn't let us read comics.
That's right. Well, it was
It makes you lazy.
Well, it didn't, did it? I mean, people who grew up reading the comics end up reading the classics too. Yes. And, of course, kids can learn to read very quickly by the comics because the picture giving them an explanation of what the words are about too. So it's a sort of a double whammy that they're getting. Yeah, so, and it's great. But it's only now that the academics are starting to take notice of the comics. Now we're getting to give them a fancy name like graphic novel. and the academics love to use these terms, you know, and they can spout about them and say interesting things. We already know this, it's in the comics, you know. We know it because we know just what effect comics can have on us, you know. And you've all probably read comics, and some of you would have your favourite comic character. Would anyone like to name one?
One would be the Phantom.
That?
The Phantom.
I'm with you there, Daniel. I loved the Phantom too. Yes, and Ginger Mix. Who said Ginger Mix? Donald Duck, yeah. Mickey Mouse, absolutely. Horace Horsecock. Snoopy, yeah.
Casper.
Casper, yeah.
Bill Garfield.
Peanuts.
Ben Boyang. Yeah, Ben Boyang. That was an Aussie one, wasn't it?
Wolverine.
Wolverine. Louie and Curly, yeah, Alex Gurney, that's right. Garfield. Yeah. Talking about Snoopy, when 6 of us went to America, from Australia here, two Queenslanders, a couple of New South Wales fellas and I, went off to an awards dinner in America at La Jolla in California. And we were there. The cartoon societies of the world usually send out open invitations for these things. You pay your own way, you pay your way into the dinner and all of that sort of business. But you meet the people in the other end of the world. So we've got friends in America, we've got them in England. We've also got some Aussies now working in America. And it's sort of very, very global these days. Anyway, this is back in 1994 that we were in America. And we went and saw Charlie Schultz, who did Snoopy and Peanuts. And it was arranged, so we drove up to his town up in Santa, whatever it was, and went to his studio and saw his beautiful big mansion and everything. And he took us into his studio, and he used to be a pastor. And he had a whole range of different Bibles on one of the shelves amongst his other books. And he gave each one of us an original Peanuts strip and signed it to each of us, you know. To Pete, all the best, Sparky Schultz. That was his nickname, Sparky. And it was beautiful, you know. Well, I'd love to tell you about
Snoopy.
Yeah, Snoopy. Peanuts was his. Snoopy was a character in Peanuts. Yeah. Peanuts was. Charlie Brown was the other name. There were both names we used there. Wizard of Ed. Johnny Hart. Ginger Miggs. Jim Kemsley. Interesting you should raise that, Mary, because the guy, Jimmy Banks was the first artist that did Ginger Miggs. And then one day he got halfway through his Sunday strip and he thought, I'm not doing this anymore, and packed it in, and walked out. So since then they had about 4 artists doing it. And one of those artists was a fellow named James Kemsley. And James Kemsley was in our ACA club, and he was a real mover and a shaker, and he actually made the Ginger Miggs strip worldwide. He ended up selling it about 150 times throughout America, South America, France and Belgium. And that's the first time Ginger's ever gone overseas. And it's been going since. Now James, his dad, used to be a patrol officer in New Guinea. And when he went in one time to deliver his Sunday page to the features editor, and put it down, and the features editor told him that they were going to drop Mandrake from the front page of the comics. And James said, oh, now's your chance to put an Australian adventure strip in its place. And the editor said, oh, no, we don't know anybody who could do that. He said, I know people who can do that. And he was talking about his dad and me, who had never met each other. I still didn't know his dad. But he knew his dad was a great storyteller because his dad used to tell him the stories about his New Guinea adventures as a patrol officer. So James was full of these stories that his dad had told him, and he knew I'd be able to draw it. So he said, I'll find you somebody who'll do it. And he
George Inmates.
no, not Ginger Megs. We came up with our own character, a patrol officer in New Guinea. And two of these books that are up here are stories of the patrol officer in New Guinea. That's one. And James Kemsley Sr. is the writer. So it was James Jr. who got a job for the old boys.
I hope you're putting this all in history. Has this been recorded?
Something's happening there.
Yes, it's been
I
recorded.
think.
Say hi.
Yeah, so the comics have been a great thing. I've loved comics. And of course I'm a songwriter and a composer too. So that's why it's taken me so long to get good, because I'm doing two streams equally all along the way, music and comics. And that means it's taken me twice as long as anybody else to get good. Because if they're only doing one thing, they're going to get good a lot faster than I was. Anyway, I've loved both things and I still love them. And if I get sick of doing one, I just go back and do the other one until I get sick of that and then go back and do the other one. Yes, Laura?
Do you have? Do you still have that Snoopy comic strip that you?
Yeah,
Do you still?
I do.
Collected it. Have you? Are you putting a price on it yet? Have you valued it at all? Or?
No, I wouldn't have a clue what I'd get for it.
Yeah.
Wouldn't have a clue.
So what comics?
What did John?
It'll be worth a few $100,000.
Oh, I doubt that, but it would certainly be a pretty good price.
Yeah.
But I don't intend to sell it.
Yeah.
However, my son, who will get it, he might sell it.
Okay.
So
Anyway,
what's
this
the list
stuff.
of your comics?
Sorry?
What's the list of your comics you've done?
Oh, well, the English ones have got too many titles. I don't remember what I did. But I did a lot of war comics. They used to have a little digest-sized comic called Commando, and it was all about the Second World War. Occasionally it would be the First World War. Only once did I do a Vietnam War story in that, because the British, they were so in a mentality of defence because of both those wars, that they're the war stories that they were only interested in. They couldn't care less about any other war, just the war that was on their doorstep,
Was
So,
that Keep Calm and Carry On?
sorry?
Keep Calm and Carry On. Have you
Don't
ever
know
heard of that?
No?
Oh, that was invented by the British. That doesn't matter.
Yeah, was it a comic?
No. It's all over the place now. Like everywhere you go online, shopping places, they have Keep Calm and Carry On. It's like a slogan they invented
Right.
for their soldiers to pick up the morale of their soldiers.
Oh.
Keep Calm and Carry On. It's been taken up by so many people selling my coffee mugs and posters.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Right, yes. I've forgotten what I was going to say now.
Sorry, you're talking about
Yeah, what was I talking
the
about?
list of the comics you've done.
Oh, yes, that's right. Mary's question, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the British ones, I don't know. The soccer, I had a lot of soccer. They didn't want to give that to me in the first place because I was an Australian. And I wouldn't know about soccer, And that was true, I didn't know about it. But they gave me a school story to do with the, Form 3 kids, and they'd put a soccer team together and I had to draw soccer after all. And the editor said, wow, your soccer scenes are fabulous. So they started giving me soccer stories from then on. And they used to be called Football Library. So I've done about 15 football libraries and about 11 commandos.
What are some of these ones up on the wall?
There's no English ones up there, I don't think. But what is up there is illustrations that I've done for local publishers who, when I came back from England, I decided to go and visit as many education publishers that I could to get work, and I got quite a bit of work, and they paid much better than the English were. The English were really robbing me. I was doing a soccer page, which I draw about so large, but would come down to the library size, and I'd get about $27 for it or something rather. in Australia, the same drawing would probably get you $200.
Oh wow.
And so I thought, I better go look for work in Australia, you know. So I visited people like Longman Cheshire, who are now called the Pearson Group, and Mimosa. These little children's books are by Mimosa, and they were super to do. And other publishers, mainly for education. They were readers being made for the kids, you know. The stories specially written for remedial purposes, you know. So a 15-year-old whose reading ability might only be for 7 years old, they'd find a story that would interest a 15-year-older, but write it in the 7-year-old language, or maybe 8-year-old, to lift them up a little bit or something. And I used to get a lot of that, and some of that's up on the wall over there. On the far right there are front covers of history of Australia type things. The two that are underneath each other, they're the printed version after I've done the art, and the one on the far right is the art. So you can see the sort of art that I give them and how they build the typographical design around it. The Eagle comic, the front cover is that's the same one for the comic here. That's a painting type thing. You wouldn't call that a cartoon so much. Although I'd started off as a cartoon and then painted up so that finally the line in some cases would disappear and the edges would become just changes of colour, and there'd be tone on it as well. So it turns into a painting. Now the one on the... Sorry, Mary?
No.
Did you work with boards and did you
Yes,
work
I
with
used to.
paint and
Yes.
like gouache and
Yeah.
stuff like that?
Yes, and markers. Markers became wonderful to work with this kind of stuff because it was fast.
Because you don't have computers back then, like when you
No, we didn't know how to make computers those days.
Yeah.
I do all the colouring for these comics in the computer now. That's all
now you
computer
do.
stuff.
Yeah,
Not drawn in the computer, coloured in the computer.
Okay.
Because I can't, I'm too old to draw now because sometimes, you know, I'll dip the nib in the ink and then I'll say, well, where's the paper? I can't tell what the gap between the end of the nib and the paper is, you know. And then sometimes I'll think, oh, there it is. And then my hand will do that. What? Stop it. Ink goes everywhere. A beautiful drawing gets wrecked, you know. But colouring in the computer with Photoshop. Adam knows all about that, don't you, Adam?
Yes.
So
It is easy. It's a
learned
piece
these
of cake.
techniques.
And,
You've had to pick the computer stuff up later on, obviously.
oh, yes, yeah. Yes, I started off with an Apple Mac because it was supposed to be the best one for graphics.
Yeah.
But then I had to change to PC because my son ended up studying PC and he's my backup man.
Okay.
So, and as a matter of fact, he's the one who's gotten me all the material I've needed.
Oh,
You know, the scanners, the screens, the printers, the whatever, you know. And he's kept me up with all of that, and if something goes wrong, I call him, Tom, where are you? And he looks after me. That's great. So the next one along there, with that long strip there, that is the Sunday strip that went into the Sunday Sun Herald. By the way, Adam,
Yes.
your coaster that you did, not poster, flyer, the flyer you did for this night was really beaut. Unfortunately, the information on it was wrong. It was only to do with the fact that you had me doing it for the Herald Sun here in Melbourne, but it was really Sydney. It was Sun Herald in Melbourne, but it matters not, of course.
Stand
So
corrected.
that Valentine is one of the early strips of the New Guinea story, and that particular one is to do with the diary of a coast watcher whose family sent his diary down to James, my writer, and said, this is the diary of our uncle Snowy Rhodes, who was a coast watcher. And it's all about the war, the Japs coming and, you know, the fleet, watching the fleet come and all of that, and escaping the junk from the landings and all that kind of stuff. And that whole story, in that particular story, was based on the diary of Snowy Rhodes. But in the story, in our story, which was fictionalised to a small point, the name James Kemsley decided to call him Dusty Lane, which I thought was pretty good.
Yeah.
You know, Snowy Roads, Dusty Lane. And I loved doing that, it was great. And the other ones are, there's a cricket one over there. That's an advertisement for the restaurant at the MCG. But some guy came along and got me to do that in a brochure that they'd be given out to the VIPs to come to our beautiful restaurant, you know, that kind of stuff. And the one above that is a Magellan magazine where it's the teenager one with the 4 teenagers walking towards us. That's a Magellan magazine that was probably done around about 1986 or something or other. And it won an award as illustration, original illustration for the religious press. Religious press, yeah, that's right. There's another Magellan one down further where the young boy's walking away from his grandmother. And then on the end there, we've got Children of Jesus, which is using the comic for telling scripture stories.
Yeah, that's awesome. There's been a lot more of that lately, like you see on shops and stuff, you see the...
Yes. There's Bibles, and even John Paul II has had his biography done in comic book form, and it's great.
Graphic novel.
Yeah, graphic novel, exactly, that's right. All right, now what I want to do now is to show you a little bit of PowerPoint stuff, because I've done what I think is my invention, but I bet it's been done lots of times somewhere else, and I've done what I call comics on a wall. And what I've done is I've actually made the Eagle story complete in a PowerPoint program so that you can show it on a wall. So I'm going to show you that now, and I'm not going to allow you to read it because it's not for the reading purposes, just to show you what I've done. That's all. But then we're going to have my funny strips. Now, after talking about a cartoon doesn't have to be funny, I did want to be funny sometimes. So I've got 2 strips there. One is called Local Government, which is little Australian animals running a local council, right? And the mayor, he's a big fat wombat, and his name is Budget O'Caucus. Then we've got Councillor Ocker, who's a returned soldier, and he's a striped bandicoot with a bandage on his tail. And the tail sort of goes like that, and the bandage is where the angle is. And then the third character there is Pizzicato Flanagan. He's another councillor. He plays violin. And he hates practising his violin in the concert hall, but he's okay if he's sitting in the fork of a tree. So we'll show that after that. And then the last thing for the night will be just a promo for the Eagle again, because I want to play my theme music, which I wrote for the Eagle. Okay? So the first thing is just a quick run through comics on a wall of the Eagle.
Peter, the smock that you have on there.
Oh, I didn't tell you, did I?
Yes, I want to know. Stand still. Is that all different people that have contributed?
Yeah, different Australian cartoonists
Oh, wow.
drawn the cartoon on the... No, I didn't do it. No, there's Vane Lizzie, there's a Knight, a Mark
this
Knight.
character here with the sun there.
Yeah, that's a Vane Lindsay.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Yeah, it is beautiful. He's the patron of the whole society, and he's 92 or something.
Could you see it, Peter?
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
And there's a Mark Knight, and there's a...
I thought mine was the Benedict House.
Oh, no. No, not really. Okay.